Thank you once again for joining us on The Four Wise Men. What's going on, fellas?
Good evening,
What
gentlemen.
Chilling. Three tiny habits that will make your marriage better than 98% of couples.
There you go. 3 tiny habits that will make your marriage better than
marriage
that will make their. So once again, T.O., you can go at Greg and stuff like that. You can hit him the way you're hitting him, but come on, bro. Come on.
He started it.
Well, the important part is for us to focus on the tips and stuff like that, right?
Hey,
So
Joey.
I tossed this out here. So let's do this. When I tossed it out, because we're not going to go through a list in a particular way, but before we go at each other, what I wanted to ask you guys was, so have you guys had the time to read the article first and foremost?
Yeah, I read the article.
So before we get into to each one of the tiny habits, and like I said, it's talking about small things that a person can do. So what were your thoughts on the article? How did you receive it, and what were your initial thoughts and thoughts on the article?
Well, I think so. The very first thing that they mentioned in the article was me 1,000%.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that I have tried to work on as the years have progressed and as we've gotten older and wiser. But yeah, I think part of it is, and maybe I'm wrong, but it's in men's nature to try to fix things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think.
Oh, hey, real quick, mention because I don't have it right in front of me. We'll just mention the topic real quick. The first topic was
validate. It says validate first, problem solve later, and so so when you're in it, validate first and problem solve later. So go ahead, D Smoke, keep picking.
Yeah. So for a long time, if my significant other would say, "Here's this situation, here's this problem," my immediate reaction was, I assessed it, got it, let me do something to fix it, or let me offer advice to fix it. Or it wasn't that it wasn't resonating with me. It wasn't that I wasn't acknowledging it or feeling empathy towards it or anything like that. I had all those traits anyway, but it was more of, now I go into reaction mode,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to taking that moment to stop and go, how this person feels in this moment now that they've shared this information with me.
Yeah.
So and Andrew will probably tell you the same thing. For a long time, it took me a while to just take that step back for a second and let that soak in before I tried to just automatically come in and try to fix whatever the problem was.
And you say that's a part of either herd mentality. That's kind of how being men, that we thought about kind of approaching relationships.
I think granted, people are different, but I think it is ingrained in us in some way to want to fix an issue, want to fix something, right? Whatever the potential situation may be. Especially even if you're looking around the house, right? Like, so, that's got to be fixed. Let me fix that. Or let me do this. Let me fix this. So when it comes to relationships and you have a potential conflict or a problem or something that's being shared and that person's being vulnerable in that moment, or they're having it's in, I think that first instinctive reaction is to, well, what can I do to fix it? And that article, when I read it, that first step was, this was me for a long time. This was a good, healthy part of our marriage. Was, like I said, it's not that I didn't acknowledge it. It's not that I didn't have empathy for it, but it was, I've got the problem. Now let me go solve it, or let me try to help you solve it. Go ahead, Toby.
So one thing I've realized, I've been married 15, probably, I don't know, 5 years ago. To the point is, to what Damien said, like we were almost programmed that I must solve it. But one thing me and my cousin, my male cousin, a long time ago was we established communication to the fact of, hey, what do you need me to be? Do you need me to just listen? Do you need me to listen and then provide? Or do you provide feedback? Or do you just, what is it that you need in this moment? And I think that's one thing that needs to be communicated in the relationship with our significant others. It's like, hey, what is it that you need me to be in this moment? And then becoming that. That was the biggest thing that when reading that first one, that's what hit me, was like, we have to learn like how to become that person that they need at the time, but also that has to be communicated too. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't need you to solve my problem. I just need you to listen to me. Or, okay, what is your thoughts on the situation? So that was my biggest thing.
Makes sense.
Greg, not so nice.
I believe that Toby, you made a good point, because really you need to identify these things prior to them becoming an issue. So, in your courting phase, hey, how do you like to handle, conflict or issues and such, blah, blah, blah. So then what role you need to play when, you reach those moments. I'm sad to admit that in society, this seems to be identified as the validate, that's for the woman, and the problem solving, that's what men do. But we have to all be honest, in our relationships, sometimes we come and we want to just say, hey, yo, blah, blah, blah is going on. And immediately they try, well, it's because you know how you are and blah, 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 and this is what you need to do. And it's acceptable when they do it. But if they come with, hey, blah, blah, blah happened at work, if we say, well, you need to tell your manager, blah, 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 I didn't need you to try to fix it for me, blah, 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 blah. Just listen. Just be that, soundboard. First, we need to establish or admit that both parties need that. Validation is very important in any relationship. Yep. I speak personally. Part of the reason why I really enjoy talking to y'all is because when I say something, you automatically get it. When I say something to because I have a lot of female friends, which is part of my problem. But when I say something to them, they're automatically like, well, Greg, you know how you are, and you know how women are, and you need to do blah, 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 as opposed to, hey, man, that really is sad, or I understand. Because a lot of times I come out of situations and I feel like I'm crazy. And I legitimately just need somebody to be like, what you're saying makes sense. What you're saying, holds water. But a lot of times it's the opposite. So validation definitely across the board for both parties. I'm with it.
And I want to second that, Greg, because I think we look at it. And you brought up the fact of us having this in our relationships, all relationships, because validation to me is something we do a disservice. We do a disservice to any person or any human being when we try to, make it specific. When we make it gender specific, I think, like I say, it takes away from the human aspect of all people wanting that. And I know for me in particular, in the way, I know for me in particular, that I want to be involved in this process, or this process called life. I think that's a French reference, right? Maybe I'm wrong. But being in this this thing called life, one of the things that I realize is I need validation. And a big part of validation for me is actually being in relationships where I'm accepted for who I am. And when I say that, being accepted for who I am is just what you just said, Greg, putting myself in a position to where I can, instead of even having something second guessed, something resolved, something fixed, coming into the relationship where I could speak, and then being able to speak in a way where I feel, like I say, fully received. And in the process of being fully received, it allows me to open up more, which I believe allows for intimacy to grow even more. And that allows for the connection to be there. And as men, we don't oftentimes always talk about that. Like I said, we could talk about it from us to our significant other, But when it comes to male friendships, male relationships, we don't always seek that same. And it's funny because we do want that validation from our peer group because we've always wanted it since we were younger. But how to actually live it out in an adult way and in a healthy way is not something we always do. So I agree that validation, and yet we're looking at it from a couple standpoint, but validation before problem solving is something that I think I've been working on for a long time in my life and haven't always done it right. Didn't always do it right in relationships, but I'm glad that I'm learning what I'm learning now so I can continue to evolve and give the best to my babe now, and then also to my friends and stuff like that. That's right, Greg. Every episode, I'm gonna give a shout out. Every episode.
Hey, but I did want to talk about something that Greg mentioned, which I think is one of the bigger challenges, and you kind of touched on a little bit too there, Will. The point of being able to understand how to do this communication, because the guys don't talk like this in the locker room. You know, we're not doing this at the age of 20. We're not doing this, we're not doing this type of communication at the age of, 20, 25, 30, when you're starting your relationship, right? And even if you get married, let's just say you get married, none of us young men are having conversations of a mature communication level in their late teens, early 20s, and not even 30. Now, yes, the culture has changed drastically, and there's more conversations about the being better communicators and things like that, and being more vulnerable and all of that. But I mean, that has not been the norm. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is how does someone at the age of 20, 25, 30 get that information or get that understanding, especially if they're not spending time with someone older? You know what I'm saying?
From the four wise men. That's why we're here, my friend.
No, I'm not. No, I get
Go ahead.
I get that part, but I'm just saying, like, but that's the whole thing, right? Like, that's the challenge to
Well,
Not
here,
everybody's going to be exposed to our podcast, though. So I'm sorry, D. I just was going to say, like, for real, that comes from previous generations, like your dad, your older brothers, your uncles, your cousins. We need to like reinvest in our communities, and not so much saying, Habitat for Humanity or paying your tithes, but really spending time and making sure people are having these conversations for real.
That's a fact. I'm once again, I'm going to second that. I think we have to start by having conversations, and we say not everyone's going to listen to the podcast, but I think what you're hoping, those old adages, each one reach one, each one teach one. I think that the simple concept of having healthy communication, a big reason for our podcast and a big reason for kind of having this communication was because we wanted to pass on wisdom that we've acquired, that we are learning, and also listen to those people who are 20-year-old, because I'm sure their perspective on how they connect and how they relate is something we can learn from while passing on that wisdom as well. So I think it's just a part of the conversation.
yeah, I
What
was
was you
going to
getting ready to
say,
say, D?
yeah, I was going to say, so, I got married at 30, and my 30-year-old self was way different than my 20-year-old self. So I don't know if my 20-year-old self would have taken the opportunity to listen to what a 30-year-old self would say, because my frame of mind, my experience in life, the challenges, the ups and downs of relationships, they weren't there for me to have that feeling to know what it is I needed out of it. Because that just wasn't where I was in that time of my life. So it wasn't until I had those heartbreaks, or I had those disjointed relationships, and I don't mean just relationships with partners, but friends as well. People grow apart sometimes when they get old, especially people that you were with when you were your teenage years and in high school. I don't know if a whole lot of us still keep in touch with everybody that we were friends with in high school. I have maybe, less of one hand of people that I can still talk to. So from a friend and male relationship counterpoint, it's a lot of us were not in that frame of mind at that time. So once we started to get older and recognize things and have the jobs and the responsibilities and time and relationships, that's when those sort of things started to sink in a little bit more, and we started to recognize it more. I wouldn't say we didn't know about it. I just think it wasn't a priority in our life at that point. So I think now that we're here, being the four
So
wise men, what would we pass on? It'd be the same thing that you hear from your parents when it's like, well, trust me on this. I've lived through this. I know this. I'm giving you some advice and some wisdom. And when you were younger, maybe you didn't want to hear it, but it all makes sense once you got to a certain age.
So let me ask you this question then. So right now there's a big emphasis on teaching kids at a younger age about finances, teaching kids at a younger age about investment, teaching kids about when we teach them about work ethic. So while I can relate and I understand what you're saying, I still think it's still something you could start to talk to individuals about, because it's one thing to have those disjointed friendships, and you're right, we learn from that experience. But as we're teaching all of the different aspects and principles of how to live these lives, I still think we do a disservice to people when we don't talk about the importance of it. I believe humans are relational creatures. And I think starting with all of the pain and all of the things that we can go to therapy about and everything else, if we can just give some insight and some wisdom on that, I think it helps. As a man who has 3 daughters, I used to sit in conferences where individuals would talk about what they thought women should be doing. And my thought would always be, why are we putting the pressure on the women to bring all of these things into a relationship instead of understanding how we need to evolve even at a younger age? And I think that we should be teaching some of those similar principles so that we can continue to be able to validate while we're in relationships. So I get it. Just throwing that out there.
Definitely. And one thing I want to say before, I think this is the last thing I'm going to say on this topic. I found value in having relationships with women that weren't sexual or romantic, because you can ask them these hard questions and be like, look, over here, I had this issue. What did I do wrong? What can I do? What did I do right? What can I do to make sure, that she feels validated, X, Y, and Z? And then you can get real information from people who could be in the individual's peer group, So not necessarily asking her best friend, because it's going to get right back to her, but have female friends that you can be like, yo, this happened to me today, or this happened to me last week. How can I, improve here, there, or whatever? And I did that a lot. If you ask any of my female friends, they know all my business. And sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. If you're married, this is not for you. I'll tell you that straight up. Talk only to your wife. But anyway,
that was the bit that was going to say, that was a big challenge right there. Like, even as you're dating and you have these other female friends, you got to be mindful of what you're saying and not saying, right? At the same time, if you have your male friends to be able to really have these hardcore conversations with, you're going to be in a better place, because again, women still look at it from one point of view and men look at it from another point of view. And yes, we need to be able to have the conversation across the table to get the full picture, but there's still things that the perspective that we're going to speak from is from the same side of the table as we're trying to learn from the other side of the table too, because you got to be able to bounce it on both sides. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I think also as you're establishing your relationship, and I don't know about you, but I'll just speak for me. But for a while, it took me a long time to feel comfortable enough to be truly open in communication. And maybe that's some residual previous stuff that you carry with you as like when I got married, I'm not afraid to admit it, but it took me quite a while to open up in such a vulnerable way to Ange that I know it was a disservice, right? I know I wasn't strengthening our relationship in that way. It was kind of holding part of that back. But I think for some men, it was, or at least for me, it took me a while just to get to that comfortability and that vulnerability to be able to share those things with my partner. For my male friends, this group here is one of the best things that's happened to me in my life. And I'm being honest about that, because I feel like we are all in a position where we are not afraid to have these open conversations and not feel judged, not feel any type of way about it. We're just being honest with one another.
I think that, but that, to what I mentioned earlier, that's the challenge of growing up, right? So as we talk about societal point of view, let's just be, when we're talking about the 80s, you figure what, the 80s and 90s when we're growing up,
Yeah.
and and of course there's been more challenge about it of late. What is masculinity, right? Like, what is that? What does it really look like? We all ain't running around here beating our chests, rocking a six pack, and making, six figures. You know what I'm saying? We're not all doing that. We're not all doing.
You
We're
talking
not
to me,
all
Greg?
doing.
Muted,
No, I
Greg.
was saying not
He's talking to
anymore.
Will, because
If you would have hit me
Will's not.
6 months ago, I would have been on that 6-figure joint.
I was getting ready to joke and say, the finance part I won't care about, but don't talk about my body and don't talk about what my body's doing to you. So when we say we ain't all running around here, don't, speak for yourself. Speak for yourself, like that podcast say. Don't speak for me.
I was in a general sense, bruh. I mean, like, why
Is
you
there
taking
any
stuff
more
personal?
room for me in those suit pants?
Oh man.
Yeah.
I think it's a good time to transition to the next question or the next prompt.